This video is sponsored by Describe. Welcome to Critical Role Demystified. I'm Mike Christensen, and this is the series where I break down the lessons we can learn as GMs and as players from episodes of Critical Role. Today we're tackling episode 75, Where the Cards Fall. Obviously, yeah, it's been a minute since I made one of these. I haven't put out a lot of videos in March at all. I talked about this in another video, but for those of you who only watch the Demystified vids, I just had a lot going on this month. We had my kid's first birthday party, and family coming into town, and also unrelated to all that, I had some car trouble and a lot of internet issues, and our clothes dryer literally burst into flames. So now that I'm through with a very chaotic March, we are finally coming back to the Demystified series. And because I've been away for so long, and I actually do want to upload the episode about a certain dragon encounter to sync up with Dragon Week at the end of April, I'm doing weekly Demystified videos through most of the month.
Hooray!
Ignore him, he's just excited.
Weekly Demystified videos!
He's been doing this ever since I made the announcement on Monday. He seems very excited about the fact that I'm doing weekly Demystified videos for some reason.
Well, of course I am. I'm the algorithm wizard. I'm happy you're doing your most popular series more frequently.
Just for the next few weeks, that's it. Also, I might be releasing these videos on Fridays instead of Thursdays, at least every once in a while. Critical Role videos take a little bit of extra time to write and to edit, so making them weekly might be... It's definitely doable for a couple weeks. It just might mean they take a little bit of extra time to cook. So that's the big announcement. I am doing weekly videos in this series through to like the 24th or so. And without further ado, let's get into the game. Ashley is still back with the table, or maybe she came back to the table. She might have had to fly out to go work in New York and then fly back for this game. And normally I don't talk about Sam's ads at the beginning of each video, but this is the first radio show ad he did. It takes place in the Dust Bowl, and I do think it's worth tracking down that clip and watching the ad. It's really funny. The link for the episode is in the description below, as always, so you can go pop down and check it out there. And now the party resumes their adventure in the city of Brass. They emerge from Senekir's shop, and they're all wearing chains that identify them as slaves to hopefully avoid further harassment on the street. As soon as they step out into the sun, they have to make another round of Constitution saving throws to try to beat the heat. Pike fails a saving throw and takes a level of exhaustion. And now they're out on the streets, Matt starts giving them a lot more details than he did before about what the city looks like and what kinds of people and beings and creatures are walking around. And the reason there's so much more detail now than there was the week before is because last week Matt had no idea they were going to the Plane of Fire at all, so he had prepared nothing. Now that's something I had some vague memories of, but I wasn't sure about it. I had it in my head that Matt didn't know they were going to the Plane of Fire, but because I didn't have confirmation, I just stuck to what I felt more confident about, which was the idea that Senekir was improvised. To that NPC specifically wasn't planned. Some folks point out in the comments, Matt had confirmed not just that one NPC was improvised, but that everything he described in the entire city of Brass was completely made up on the spot. That's probably why he called for a break the moment they transported to the Plane of Fire, so he could get his thoughts in order and maybe jot a couple things down. And I am honestly so impressed with what he was able to establish in that first session with basically no prep time. We had the Efreet as the city guards, we had humanoids serving as slaves, we had some really cool atmosphere and flavor describing the city itself, we had a very memorable NPC, which I talked about in the last episode, and we had the beginnings of a quest. There were only 3 fire giants in town who were not enslaved, so you have to go and talk to one of them to try to track down the armor. He gave himself just enough runway that he could get through that session, and then once it was over, he could actually do some prep before the next game. However, now Matt has actually had a week to figure out how he wants to present his version of the city of Brass. And so here are the details he includes in this session. There are stone towers in the city, but some of them are also made of glass. There are waterways of lava built into the roads, almost like narrow canals of magma. This is going to be important terrain in case a fight breaks out in the streets, he said foreshadowingly. The Efreet town guards now have a name, the Illuminated, and they also wear matching vests and pendants. And there are also a lot of devils walking around the streets, which is also a very important bit of foreshadowing. Senekir is taking them to see Waska the Fire Giant, who we are now told can be found at the Zenith Forge, which is in the Pyre, the street where you look for all the artisans in the city market. Matt is now trying to establish some geography for the city itself, identifying some districts and points of interest. However, the fact that they didn't receive this sort of geography in the first episode is kind of a happy accident. The fact that they didn't know any of the streets or districts made them feel lost and aimless, which was a really valuable experience to give them when they entered the city for the first time. But it does seem like Matt is much more comfortable once he actually has a chance to orient himself in a fictional city by fleshing out the districts and domains. Senekir is guiding them through the city, and he specifically warns them not to go anywhere near the Charcoal Palace, where the Sultan lives. We'll learn a little bit more about the Sultan later on. However, There's something funny that happens whenever an NPC literally walks you around the new city and points at different regions and districts and basically gives you a lay of the land. It makes them feel like a tour guide, and Keyleth even comments on this, which gives Matt a chance to justify this by incorporating it into Senekir's characterization.
So do you, play tour guide often to newcomers in this town?
Uten at this point says, it is not often that we take newcomers under our wing like this. Usually they are either customers or, to be arrested shortly. So no, this is probably the first tour we've given. In fact, Senekir seems to strangely enjoy it.
Playing tour guide?
Apparently. And he kind of mentions over in Senekir at this point, other hand is out, and it's like,
and around this way you can see the Venstral Spire, which is a wonderful craft fair that happens once every 2 weeks.
Now, Matt got very lucky that when his players first transported to the Plane of Fire in the last episode, it was around the point in the session where he was going to call for a break anyway, so he had a chance to pause and collect his thoughts. And he was able to figure out enough information about the city that he could offer a brief description to get them through the rest of the session before fleshing out the city in more detail for this game. But we're not always quite so lucky. Sometimes your players will travel to a new plane of existence towards the beginning of a session, or just after coming back from a break, and you don't have the time to vamp and come up with some general descriptions to get you through a short burst and get to the end of the session so you can take some actual notes and prep the next game. Sometimes you just need to start inventing details right there in the moment at the table, and you're not ready for that. And thankfully, if you find yourself in that sort of situation, you don't have to go through it alone. You can actually find pre-written descriptions of everything you might need if you sign up for today's sponsor, Describe. Describe is an excellent website where a team of incredible Emmy award-winning writers create descriptions that you can read aloud at your table. They've got scenes for describing monsters, magic items, NPCs, combat, nature, spells, and, relevant to today's video, other planes of existence. For example, here's their description for the Sultan's city in the elemental plane of fire, which is the equivalent of the city of brass. The domed dwellings and soaring spires of the city blaze in the heat of the incessant suns high above. The entirety of the metropolis, sprawling for leagues in all directions, shines gold, copper, bronze, and brass, metal as far as the eye can see, radiating heat. The streets teem with crimson-skinned Ifrits, and numerous smithies ring with the sounds of hammers and anvils. But that's not all. Below this scene, the team at Describe has actually provided some advice for using the Sultan's city in your own campaigns. In case you don't actually have a plan for this location, this advice can help get your wheels spinning. And the whole collection of planar scenes is just incredible. At this level of the Vox Machina campaign, Matt's players can pretty much jet off to any dimension with no notice, and leave Matt scrambling to figure out how to describe the scene when they arrive. But you don't have to let that happen to you. You can actually find scenes for other realities, portals, monuments and ruins, and even meetings with gods. And if you visit describe.com/supergeek and use the promo code supergeek at checkout, you can save 10% off of your first subscription payment. Once again, that's dscryb.com/supergeek and use the promo code supergeek. Thank you so much to Describe for sponsoring this video. As they walk through the streets, Vax checks to see if anybody else notices him. Are they able to see through his invisibility? But no, it's just Senekir. That's something that Matt sort of accidentally established in the last session when he had Senekir laugh at Vax's invisible prank. Matt was then faced with a choice. Make it possible that lots of people can see through invisibility, which would be weird considering Senekir didn't bring that up at all in the last game when Vax asked if it would be an issue for him to walk around invisible. Or just allow Senekir to have this one weird unique power. He opts to go for that approach. And again, there's a happy accident here. It helps to add to Senekir's mystique. It makes him feel just a little bit creepier. The party arrives at the Zenith Forge, and Senekir asks how they're handling this. The slaves shouldn't really talk unless they're being honest about how they're not really slaves.
What's gonna make him give us this thing anyway?
Well,
Do we have
we're gonna try to.
him?
Aren't we gonna try to steal it once we see it? Or are we really gonna
maybe
try
he's
to
got
purchase
beef
it?
with somebody in the city, and we'll go out and jack him up if
In
he'll
exchange?
tell us.
In exchange for that?
Yeah.
Or
That's true.
maybe we can. If we see that he has it, then we can challenge him to a game of cards.
Or maybe...
Remember that conversation, because it's going to be kind of interesting to see how Matt incorporates some of what he may have overheard in that scene. Vex casts Locate Object to try to find the armor and doesn't detect it within 1,000 feet of them. Still, they enter the forge and they see Waska, a 20-foot tall fire giant working at a forge, creating a huge sword. They ask him about the armor they're looking for, and he's never heard of it. But when they tell him it was one in a card game, he says he does know where they could probably find it. He offers to sell them the information they're looking for, but he doesn't quote them a price. He asks them to make him an offer. He then pulls out a jeweler's eye and regards them all through it, and he says he knows they have a whole lot of magic on them, so he wants to know what they're willing to part with. because whatever they're willing to give him will help demonstrate what this information is worth to them. But also, this is a great way for Matt to help the players get rid of some of the magic items they're lugging around that they never ever use. Every time they sit down and swap out items, they go through their inventory and they find some items that none of them are using, and none of them think are good enough to take because they would cost an attunement slot or something like that. And so this is a nice way for the players to offload some of that stuff. They start with a great sword of frenzy and a ring of lightning resistance. That's their first offer, and Waska says that's a good start. They follow that up with what Marisha calls a +1 magic necklace. I'm not sure what that is. It might be something from Pathfinder. They've got a lot of old crap. Waska calls that a much weaker second move. They followed up with a +1 ring of protection, and now they're actually pissing off Waska.
You are to make one more offer.
All right.
If you do not, I will tell the Illuminated of the dubious outsiders masquerading as servants. Slaves sent to undermine the rule of the Grand Sultan of the Efreet, the Lord of the Flame, the potent and incandescent, the tempering and eternal flame of truth, the most puissant of hunters, Marshal of the Order of the Fiery Heart, the smoldering dictator, the crimson firebrand, Maraki al-Sedan al-Harig ben al-Hazen.
God bless you.
So, what is your final offer?
Was that one man's resume?
This is such a great reaction from an NPC, because first of all, they can't just sit here and do this all day. If you introduce a negotiation into your D&D game, there has to be some sort of risk of failure, and a consequence for failure. This makes Waska feel like a real person, because he's not just going to sit here all day like a video game NPC, patiently waiting and taking every item the players hand off to him without comment. This threat from Waska also introduces a ticking clock, by giving them just one more chance to make the best offer possible. And of course, we get another major world-building detail for the City of Brass, the Sultan's name. But not just his name, but the culture around it. If someone says his name, they have to say the full thing, probably by law. And that tells you a lot about how strict the laws are in this city, and signals the fact that you probably don't want to wind up on the wrong side of them. The players offer Waska 40 pounds of white dragon hide, which can be used as materials for crafting. That's honestly a really good final offer, not just because it helps them get rid of some crap that's taking up a lot of space in their bag of holding, but also because they're identifying what would actually be appealing to this NPC specifically. Waska says there are 2 other free fire giants in the city. They turned on their fellow giants and earned a free position, while all the others were enslaved. So, you know, none of these guys are exactly cool people. Sugan was the leader of the fire giant takeover, and he controls all the other imprisoned fire giants. But Juriel runs a slag mine, and she lives near the Shrine of Surtur. If they're looking for something that was won in a card game, then that's who they need to talk to. Waska gives them a small copper coin, well, small for him, it's the size of a manhole cover, and says that this will help grant them an audience with Juriel. That's a great detail. I think if you're going to include giants in your game, you really have to have some fun with how big their small items are when the players get their hands on them. Then Waska goes back to work, signaling that he's no longer going to answer any more questions. Senekir leads them to the shrine, and along the way, Matt draws their attention to a scary devil fortress they can see in the distance. The party asks about this, and they learn that it's the embassy where the ambassadors to the 9 hells reside. Before they go inside the shrine, Grog looks at the medallion in more detail. There is writing on the coin, and it's written in Giant, but he can't read it because he's literally illiterate. Vex casts Locate Object again, and senses the armor inside the building, on the wall of the first floor. Vax scales the outside of the wall, but he detects the window is trapped, and the trap is way too big for him to pick it, so he can't sneak in and steal the armor. So he climbs back down, and they all go inside. The walls are adorned with a few beautiful objects, including the ornate armor they're looking for. Juriel looks over the medallion and grants them an audience. However, Grog wants to make sure that that's all the medallion indicates. Like, it doesn't say something like, eat these dudes or whatever. So in order to try to read it, he drinks a potion of Fox's Cunning. But unfortunately, Matt rules that while the potion gives him advantage on intelligence and offers him some clarity, it doesn't mean that he now has knowledge he didn't have before. It didn't teach him how to read. This is a tricky situation. I've talked before about how Matt and Travis are generally really keen on treating Grog's illiteracy as a source of comedy, but not as a way to impede him in battle. During the Sphinx fight, Grog was able to read the letters, he just wasn't able to verbalize them due to shock. A lot of people in the comments said, no, he couldn't read them. But let's clarify, there was nothing that happened in between his first turn and his second that taught him what those letters were. He just literally wasn't able to speak about them because he was in shock about Pike being stabbed. Now, in that case, Matt's not really changing his ruling from there to here, because as people also pointed out in the comments of that video, Grog doesn't necessarily have to know what the letters mean in order to know what the letters are. Like, you could say that he knew that it was KJI or whatever the letters were that he saw, but not that he knows how it's pronounced or how to say it. In this case, you could argue the same thing. Grog might conceivably recognize individual letters, but that doesn't mean that he can put them together in order to learn how to read. However, I will say that this moment in this episode does kind of get close to a tricky situation. Travis wants to do whatever he can to make sure the party isn't walking into a trap. Everyone is pretty concerned about that. The only way that he can think to do that is by using his ability to read giants. Matt wants to honor what they've already established about Grog, that he can't read. And I'm not even saying that Matt is doing anything wrong by insisting that Grog is illiterate and so he can't read the medallion, but I do think this is the first moment where Travis actually feels like Grog's illiteracy is starting to become a hindrance. And in general, any hindrance or challenges we give our players are things that we want them to already understand and anticipate are going to happen. We don't want to blindside them with things. And ideally, they should also be things that they think are fun. When Travis keeps track of the items in the bag of holding, Matt doesn't punish him by reminding him that Grog doesn't understand math or numbers, because he knows that this is important to Travis and it's something fun that he can do to help the party. Again, I'm not saying that Matt should have suddenly allowed Grog to be literate, but Travis did meet him halfway by drinking an intelligence potion. He was trying to acknowledge, I know I can't read, I just want to read one thing. And I think this could have given Matt the opening to allow Grog to make these connections and understand things he might not have ordinarily understood, which is all Travis wanted. He didn't want Grog to suddenly know how to read all the time. He just wanted to read one sentence in a language he already speaks. So I do kind of think Matt should have allowed him to, at the very least, make an intelligence check to try to figure out what was written on the medallion. I can absolutely understand Matt's logic behind his decision if he's looking at the consistency of the world. But I also do think this ruling was maybe a little bit more strict than it needs to be. And yes, I know some people are going to say this in the comments, it does lead to one of the best Critical Role scenes later in this episode. And I know that for some critters, that means that you can't argue that Matt should have done something differently because of how it led to something great. But also, I think Matt could have handled this differently. Anyway, they enter negotiations with Juriel. They drop the pretense that they're all slaves, and Scanlan introduces himself as a gambler who travels across the plains just looking for cool things to win. He actually says he won all of his companions in various card games, and he just wants to play a game with Juriel. If he wins, he says he wants the armor, which he definitely just chose at random by scanning the walls of the room. If she wins, she wants his friends. Right away, they agree that this is not just one game.
Best of three. Best of three.
This is a great way to make sure one bad roll won't completely screw over your players. You want to at least give them a sporting chance. She picks the game, the Tinder Start, known to them as the Gambit of Ord. This is the card game they saw played in the casino in Ank'Harel, but they never played it themselves. However, since Matt considers Scanlan and maybe bards in general to just be predisposed to have a lot of general knowledge about the world and be world travelers and things like that, he allows Scanlan to roll to see if he's played this game and already knows the rules. And it turns out he has. So Matt explains the rules for Sam and the other players. It's a card game, but they'll represent it by rolling dice. First, they roll a d8, representing the first card they each draw. Then they each draw another card, and they roll a d6 for that card. Then one final draw represented by a d4. I love the mechanic of using progressively smaller dice to basically represent the fact that there are fewer cards in the deck. With a card game, one important mechanic is that each card you draw is one fewer card that can appear in a future draw. But in a dice game, any die can always roll any number. So you reduce the die itself with each round to represent the fact that certain cards are no longer available within the deck anymore. Additionally, with each new roll, they can see how they're doing and raise the stakes like a game of poker. However, in this case, they've already agreed to the terms of the game, and so any deception you might use to get people to fold, can you fold in the Hand of Ord? Actually don't know. Do you just try to convince other people to raise their bets in between rounds? Whatever, either way, the entire social engineering aspect of this game is gone. They're essentially playing a game of poker where everybody went all in immediately, and so now it's literally just up to the luck of the cards, because nobody is really going to raise the bet. As a side note, the cartoon managed to figure out a way to invent a game that it actually does work a little bit better for this kind of situation where everybody already knows what's on the table and what is at stake, but where you still want to have some sort of challenge involved in the game itself besides just what cards you got dealt. The writers behind the show were also able to figure out how to make this storyline about Pike herself. Because as you've probably noticed, unlike most of the other quests for Vestiges, going to get the armor doesn't really have anything to do with Pike's character or her backstory. And that's a real shame, but it is kind of the nature of the fact that Matt didn't know they were going to the Plane of Fire in this episode, and he didn't know that they were going to have Pike with them whenever they did go to get the armor, and so he wasn't really able to take the time to prep something the same way he would have with one of the other Vestiges. Heck, maybe this is just the problem with giving each player a vestige when one of them can't be at the game every week. I'm not saying he should have done anything differently in this case, just that The cartoon was able to adjust this to be a lot more satisfying. We'll probably do a video or two about the specific way that show adapted this actual play into a new format once I'm done with the Vox Machina campaign overall, and maybe once the cartoon finishes, but that's a topic for another day. Because here in the moment, Matt and Sam did realize the problem with this game. When the stakes are already on the table, it's literally just down to dice rolls. Right before the third card, Matt was maybe going to fix it. Juriel starts to raise the ante, but then stops herself, and says, let's see how this one goes. And Scanlan loses the hand. He gets a total of 8 to her 11. So they play again, but now Matt does start raising the ante. After the first card, Juriel asks Scanlan to be added to the pot. He can also raise the bet, but he doesn't want anything else she has, so he just asks her to skip the next card and just draw the final card, while he still draws all 3. She agrees, they draw, and she reveals her cards, and he doesn't reveal his, because he knows he lost, and he doesn't want to show his hand, literally. And he comes clean. They know what the armor is, they're not leaving without it, and they are prepared to fight. She says that is not going to go well, and so he reveals his cards. He got a 9 to her 10, he lost by 1. So now they're all hers. But she knows they're experienced and capable and have traveled far, so if they do a favor for her, she'll give them their freedom and the armor. But they have to agree to the favor first. But Scanlan just really wants to see what happens if they play one more hand. So if he loses, they'll do her the favor. Otherwise, she still owns them. Actually, nothing changes. There are no stakes. He just wants to win one.
Please let me win.
So they play, again without raising the stakes, just straight dice. And he loses, again, just by 1. So yeah, obviously they agree to the favor. She tells them that her lover was killed in the streets for no reason by Gurix, a pit fiend who lives in the Nine Hells embassy they saw earlier. She can't kill him because he's too tied up in the politics of the city, but Vox Machina could kill him. They reply that they were warned never to go to the embassy, and she agrees, yeah, no, never go into the embassy. But Gurix frequents the arches, the slave markets in town. He comes by every few days looking for rare and unique servants to bring to the Nine Hells. He was just there recently, so he should be back in a day or 2. So that's the deal. Go kill him, and don't tie it back to Juriel at all, and they can leave with the armor. And this is a great move from Matt for 2 reasons. First of all, it seems like Matt had this option ready from the moment they sat down at the table. Actually, I meant that as in the character sitting down at the table to play the game with Juriel, but I guess it's also true for the player sitting down at this game table. That's why he established there were devils walking around the streets the moment the party stepped out of Senekir's shop. The first time they were back in the city, in this session, he was establishing that there are devils in town. And then later, after their visit with Waska, it's also why he drew their attention to the Nine Hells embassy. He spaced out the foreshadowing, so it just feels like part of the set dressing, but he was absolutely still setting this up. And there was also a chance he was never going to need it. There was a chance that Scanlan didn't roll like trash, and they really did just gamble and win the armor. And I don't know if Matt had anything else up his sleeve to make this more exciting at that point, or if he just would have let them clean up and go home after a job well done. But of course, that's not how it went. But rather than the campaign ending with the party getting sold into slavery in the city of Brass, or even just trying to run a prison break session, Matt was able to quickly pivot toward a new mission. Go kill someone for her. And the second reason this plot point is a great move from Matt is because before they even went inside, Travis/Grog literally suggested they could go offer to do Juriel a favor by going to fight somebody for her. So Matt basically already knew his players so well that he knew what they would respond well to. And when he heard Travis suggest this plan before they settled on the gambling plan, Matt must have been so pleased because he knew this option was waiting in the wings in case the card game didn't go well. Anyway, as they get their mission from Juriel, Scanlan asks what this pit fiend looks like, and she finds a book and shows them an illustration. And at the table, Matt shows them the pit fiend art in the monster manual. She adds that he wears a black chain with a symbol of 2 manacles entwined with a pulsing red sigil. Vex asks for some symbol they can wear in public for the next day or so to make sure people know they're claimed as slaves and no one tries to take them. So she brings back some black iron collars they can wear. They go leave and they go back to Senekir's place, and they have to make some more constitution saving throws against the heat, and Vex, Percy, Keyleth, and Pike all gain a level of exhaustion. Also, the AC for the studio itself was out, so they are also hot in real life. Immersion. They go to break, and when they come back, night falls in the city of Brass. The sky turns red, almost like there's an eclipse, and everybody vanishes off the streets except for the Ifriti. Senekir says there is a curfew in town. That's such a fun way to figure out how to handle days and nights in a completely alien landscape like the Fire Plane. Is there night in the Plane of Fire? Sure, the sky gets a bit darker and everyone in the city goes inside all at once. Really? Why? Because the Sultan says so. Oh, okay. Wow, let's really not mess with this guy. He seems intense. The party debates going to break into the Fire Giant house and steal the armor and just bailing immediately, since they want to get back to Fort Daxio as soon as they can. But Juriel definitely has the home turf advantage. There's maybe a lot more Fire Giants and traps, and she did mention enchantments on her home. so it's just not a great idea. Keyleth scries on the Pit Fiend, and her vision takes her through the embassy and through several walls into a room where a Pit Fiend sits in a circle in a room, almost meditating, with slaves chained to the wall and moaning. Keyleth also deduces from all the walls she passed through that the inside of the embassy is kind of a labyrinth, so even just getting to Gurix would be a pretty tall order. So since it doesn't seem like a good idea to go into the embassy to try to get this guy, they need to figure out where they do want to fight him. They really don't want to fight him in the actual slave market if they can avoid it. They decide that maybe they can convince him, if they have slaves for sale, they can trick him into entering the mansion, thinking it's some sort of pocket plane where all the good slaves are kept. Maybe some of the party can basically be on display outside the mansion as a demonstration of the types of slaves they have available. And eventually, because they know he wants unique slaves, they land on the idea of Scanlan being the owner and casting Seeming on everyone else to make them look like Vex and Vax. So there would be 6 identical sextuplets. Scanlan can only change their height by a foot, but he can make them ascend in height like nesting dolls. They ask Senekir about some of the more notable slaves he's seen purchased in the market, and he mentions that some Celestials have been bought, the winged angels that were sold for a lot of money. And Vax can have wings, so maybe Scanlan's spell can make Vax seem like he has some angelic heritage, especially when he pulls out his wings.
So wait, I'm just going to recap these plans here. Plan A, making us all sextuplets and trying to get him into the mansion.
Celestial septuplets.
With wings.
to get him into the mansion.
Yeah, I think we should all
Plan
have
B,
wings.
we're all sextuplets.
Seeming does not add wings. It has the same arrangement of body parts.
But
if
one
of them
has
wings,
for each.
But if one of them has wings, you could change those wings into a different color.
Yes.
Could I?
Oh my god.
Could I use Alter Self? Because Alter Self gives
Alter Self.
give wings.
Can I drink a Red Bull?
Keep recapping Plan B.
Because I can give myself gills and stuff like
So
that.
plan A, again,
Yeah.
sextuplet, slaves, mansion.
Yeah.
Plan B, we're still sextuplets, but this time we're somehow framing him for dishonoring the Sultan and then attacking him in the middle of the square.
Yeah.
Which is why Plan A is much better.
Plan C, still sextuplets.
Yes.
That doesn't change. But now we're just ambushing him in the center of the arches, and we've paid off the guards to
Yeah.
turn a blind eye.
We don't have enough money to pay off the guy.
We have tons of money.
We got a lot.
We don't have that much
We
money.
don't have that much money.
Maybe we can bribe them with 6 identical slaves. So what's it gonna be? Plan A, the mansion? That's certainly gonna fail. Plan B, the framing job, or Plan C, the bribery/ambush?
I'm feeling
Plan A. Into Plan B if it doesn't work.
All right, great.
Senekir also suggests Scanlan should not look like a little pink-skinned dude. When asked what form he should take, Matt/Senekir suggests an Azer, a flaming dwarf. That's a great move from Matt to make sure an NPC points out this issue before they get too deep into the plan. And that's not the last time he's going to do something like that in this episode, more on that in a minute. The party conjures the mansion inside Senekir's home so they can sleep inside another dimension and get some relief from the heat. But before Grog goes to bed, he asks Pike if she can teach him some letters before his potion of Fox's cunning wears off. He wanted to read today, and he wasn't able to do so even though she can't teach him anything about reading Giant, he still just wants to know a couple of letters.
Do you know how to spell your name? Okay. It's very easy. You have 4 letters in your name,
How many?
but there are 2 of the same letter.
How
So
many
you really
le-
only have 3 letters in your name.
But I'm not so hot on the numbers.
Okay, well, we won't talk about numbers. Okay, what's the first letter of the alphabet? This you know.
G.
That's the first letter of your name.
Oh, it is?
Yes,
It doesn't
but that's
stop
not
at
the
that?
first letter of the alphabet. You've said it before.
Hey.
It's the first letter. Oh, well, you wouldn't know that because you don't know how to spell.
Fucking A, this is tough.
Oh,
What?
you just said it.
Fucking A.
Yes. A. A is the first letter of the alphabet.
A. A. A.
Okay.
A.
And we can keep going.
An absolutely adorable scene and the highlight of the episode for just about everybody. Not me. I love this scene, but my favorite moment is coming a little bit later. But it really is such a cute interaction. And honestly, kudos to Travis for realizing Pike had no way to introduce the letter A to Grog as something he was already familiar with, so he had Grog just say fucking A to give her a way in to the letter A. And kudos to Ashley for realizing that this could go on forever and finding the perfect stopping point. I'm sure the comments of that video and this video are filled with people saying they would love to watch Pike teach Grog how to read for 3 hours. And you know what? Honestly, that would be fun to watch, like a podcast episode or something. But it doesn't need to happen in the middle of this actual play D&D game when what's really important is trying to fight a pit fiend. After Pike's lesson, Matt describes how the effects of the potion fade, and the lesson goes with them. The cast begs Matt to let Grog still be able to spell his name at least. So he allows Grog to roll, and he only gets a 12. So Matt says that Grog remembers grr, and that's it. Also, just before bed, Pike casts Greater Restoration on herself to remove one of her 2 points of exhaustion, and everybody sleeps off their other point of exhaustion. So they're all fresh as a fiddle. Before they leave for the market, Senekir asks for some token from them. So if they end up making a speedy escape from the Plane of Fire, they can have a way to be found if he has to track them down. And then Uten leads them to the arches. They find a spot to set up, and once they know the pit fiend is getting a little bit closer, they'll start putting on a much more elaborate display. Vax will pop out his now angelic-looking wings, and they'll do some spells or tricks to get the pit fiend's attention. As they wait, Matt describes a pair of 15-year-old slave boys available for sale across the street. But these aren't ordinary teen boys, because both of them have blue skin and no pupils. Vex immediately wants to buy them so they can set the boys free when they get home. Everyone else says, focus on the job, don't get distracted. But as soon as he hears her say that, Matt changes Vex's alignment back to chaotic good. And Laura is very happy to hear this. Because as I discussed in the past, Matt did not seem to realize at the time, but when he changed her alignment, she viewed that as a punishment. And in this moment, she celebrates being changed back to neutral good because it feels like a reward. So just reiterating what I said in that video almost 30 episodes ago, it is absolutely fine to tell your players that they are not acting in accordance to the alignment they chose, and to even identify an alignment that better lines up with their new behavior. But if you just unilaterally change their alignment for them and they view it as a punishment, then that clearly means that the player doesn't understand your argument and you need to communicate better with them. People got so spicy in the comments of that video, but I was never saying that alignment shouldn't matter or there shouldn't be some consequence for acting outside of your alignment. I was saying that if Laura viewed it as a punishment and Matt didn't, then Matt did a bad job explaining why he did what he did. We kind of know this for a fact because Laura still didn't understand his arguments until after the campaign ended, when they talked about it during the post-campaign Q&A. Once he made his case in that episode, she kind of said, well, yeah, that makes sense. But that conversation apparently didn't happen, or wasn't happening the right way, during the campaign itself. So, once again, communication is vital, and alignment in particular is pretty weird, so you might need to be especially patient with your players when discussing whether their characters are acting inside their alignment or not. But anyway, the question remains, what are they going to do about these boys? Vex and Scanlan go talk to them and their owner, who tells them that the boys have angel blood. These are the first Aasimar the party has encountered. And this is a great tactic from Matt, and we'll discuss why in just a minute.
Hello. Hello, I am Slave Master Francois Australia. And I am curious about your 2 angel boys.
Scanlan haggles with the owner, and they do end up buying these kids.
He puts the coins away, pulls out a piece of paper. What's your full name?
Francois Bertrand Jean-Luc Australia.
The boys are asked their names, and they respond that it doesn't matter. The party gets to name them, I guess, making it clear that their spirits have been broken. They're asked if they've seen a red thing with wings around, and they react with fear. They haven't, but they know what that would mean for them. Meanwhile, Keyleth tries scrying on the pit fiend a few times, but he rolls high enough to succeed on the save and resists her spells. Percy and Pike take the boys and make the rounds of the slave market, seeing what's for sale, and making a show of themselves. This is something we talked about a few times before. When you set up a scenario where the players have to wait for something to happen, sometimes they will get antsy and try to do whatever they can to help make the plan happen. They want to start stacking the deck. However, in this case, they don't have to wait that long, because next Matt describes that they wait for a while, and then they see Gurix the Pit Fiend walking up the road. He passes by Scanlan, completely disinterested, but then Percy walks up with the boys, returning to the mansion, and this catches Gurix's attention. And now he wants to stick around. And this is why introducing these boys was such a great move, because Vox Machina had a great plan. They found out what kind of slaves would attract the Pit Fiend's attention, and then they used magic to make themselves look like exactly what he would want to buy. It is honestly a perfect plan. It's also literally impossible for it to succeed, because Pit Fiends have true sight. He will immediately see through any illusion. So in order for them to pull off this plan, they would need to actually have access to the kinds of slaves that would attract the Pit Fiend's attention. They would need someone with actual celestial blood. Matt Colville has a quote, I can't remember exactly how he phrases it, but I'm going to paraphrase. His job as the Dungeon Master is not to defeat the heroes or ruin their plans, but instead it is to fix their solutions. When you're listening to your players figuring out their plan of attack, you shouldn't listen to their plan so you can figure out how you can screw them over. Instead, analyze the assumptions they're making and where they've misjudged the scenario in front of them in a way that will make their plan fall apart. If they've forgotten something that should be obvious, or at the very least that you've already made clear to them in one way or another, you could, of course, just choose to let the players live with the consequences of their mistake. But there are also times like this where the players come up with what would essentially be a perfect plan, if not for one tiny kind of major detail that they don't know about. Now, Matt Mercer could have had the players roll an Arcana check in the previous scene when they were making the plan, in order to figure out that the plan wasn't going to work because the devil has true sight. Or maybe Senecure could have heard the illusion plan and chimed in with the detail that powerful creatures often have true sight, and this would make their illusion useless. After all, Senecure himself does seem to have true sight, so it would make sense coming from him. But it's possible Matt didn't realize the flaw in the plan until after the planning scene was done. Or he just likes this plan, and rather than sending them back to the drawing board to come up with something completely new, he instead just introduced an element that could help the players implement this plan the way they wanted to. So back to the scene. The party pretends to be ready to pack it in for the day, and Scanlan summons the magical door. But the Pit Fiend says he wants to do business with Scanlan. He speaks psychically, and Matt tells them that they've fought larger creatures than this, but this thing feels truly evil. Percy immediately clarifies that he brought the boys into the house and had them brought downstairs to make sure they are actually safe from the Pit Fiend if he does take the bait and follow them into the house. The Pit Fiend just wants the boys, and Scanlan tries to entice him into other potential creatures in the mansion. The Naga, the Garistro, the other celestial beings, the orcs. He rolls a 31 deception, but the Fiend says, not today. Right now, all he wants are the Aasimar boys. Scanlan tries to play hardball, asking if Gurx can even afford his prices since he's not exactly carrying any money on him. He's naked except for the chain. But the Pit Fiend eventually determines that Scanlan is not a serious salesman and starts to leave. Scanlan offers to charge him 30,000 for each Aasimar, and this makes the Fiend stop and consider it, and then keep walking. Again, it seems like Matt likes this plan, but he's not just going to hand them a win so easily. First rule of any negotiation, be ready to walk away. And when the time comes to do so, you have to actually do so. So Scanlan drops the offer to 10,000 for each, and the Pit Fiend takes the deal. He says the embassy will handle the money, bring out the boys. Vex comes out and tries to coax the Fiend inside by telling Scanlan that the female Aasimar has gotten loose and she's more powerful than the boys. Sam tries to yes and him, and Matt has Scanlan and Vex both roll deception checks. But Scanlan rolls a natural 1, which Matt still considers an auto-fail at this point in the campaign. So Scanlan runs inside and has Grog cut him up a little bit and runs back out to ask the Fiend for help. I need help with this dangerous Aasimar. But Gurx knows they're lying, and the embassy can blacklist them from doing business in the city. That's a really fun threat for the Pit Fiend to make, considering that it actually has absolutely no consequences for our players, but the point is that he is going to leave, and that is exactly what the players want to avoid. But also, it's a signal from Matt to basically give up on the idea of getting this guy into the mansion. It was always going to be difficult to convince him to do that, but now that ship has sailed. Scanlan apologizes and goes inside and says it's Jenga time, we gotta kill this dude. The players still want to try to seize on some sort of advantage, some sort of sneak attack, some sort of strategy, something. But they have no advantage they can press. Half of them are outside the mansion, and they don't even really have any way to discuss strategy, even if they could come up with one. Like, they start talking about how they could ambush and surprise attack this guy, and they can't even figure out any advantage they have. And then Matt points out they also have no way to communicate without being extremely obvious. So even if they had a plan, they can't actually put it together. So Scanlan emerges from the mansion with the angel babies in tow, ready to jump into a fight. However, Keyleth is still in the alley behind the door, where she was hiding and scrying. And as he reaches for the angel boys, she casts Feeble Mind on Gurx. It's not much, but it's basically their only hope to try to get any sort of advantage before the fight actually starts. Gurx takes the psychic damage, but he makes a save, so his intelligence is not reduced to 1. And unfortunately, that Hail Mary was Keyleth's A-level spell. Vex bursts Trinket out of the locket, everyone gets ready to throw down, and Matt says let's come back to this next week since it's 11 p.m. So they end the game, and Matt actually starts to do his sign-off. But then he realizes something and adds a little detail for the players.
We're gonna jump in next Thursday into a mid-street City of Brass
sextuplets
battle.
Sextuplet.
Oh, jeez.
Vex, and Vex.
Here's the one thing I'm gonna leave you with, because I feel this is important.
Oh no.
As soon as you guys watch this kind of slight dissipation of arcane energy splash across the torso and head of the Pit Fiend, and it kind of steps into its back foot, and you all realize this is the Jenga moment. As you're preparing to go into combat battle, you watch as the Pit Fiend narrows its eyes, and then from immediately to its left, a small localized gateway tears open, and out from it you watch a humanoid female with large red feathered wings, carrying some sort of glowing lasso or rope at her side, armor, and a large weapon with a bow slung across her shoulder that flies out next to the pit fiend. You rang.
Ah, fuck.
And that's what we'll pick up next week. So,
we're doomed.
No offense intended toward the alphabet scene, but this is my favorite moment in the episode. It's honestly one of my favorite moments of watching Matt Mercer as a dungeon master. See, Matt has probably already decided that the fight with the pit fiend would include another monster, an Arañez, which is another kind of devil. However, in the moments after he ended the session, but before they actually wrapped up the episode and walked away from the table, Matt realized that if he ends the session here, and then starts the next game by having Gurix summon in an ally, his players might think that he rebalanced the fight in between sessions. They might decide that he realized this fight was going to be too easy, so he retroactively realized he should have added another villain. They might feel the hand of the DM. It might feel artificial. But by instead introducing the Arañez here at the end of the session, his players now know that this was always his plan, to introduce an ally to fight alongside Gurix. And now his players have a chance to prepare a battle plan that actually matches the fight they're going to have, rather than just giving them a week to prepare to fight only one enemy, only for Matt to then suddenly change the conditions of the test immediately at the start of the next session by introducing another foe that they could have had absolutely no way to prepare themselves for. Now, Matt did not have to do that. I don't think it would have been the end of the world if there had been a new enemy introduced at the beginning of the next session. I think even if his players did think that he had rebalanced the fight in between sessions, they also would have understood that that would only be done to make sure the players had a proper challenge. Honestly, I think a bigger source of criticism would have been online fans rather than his players themselves. But he still does something really vital here. He plays fair with them. Just like when he introduced the Angel Babies, his goal is not simply to screw them over, but to actually give them the best chance they have to succeed against seemingly insurmountable threats. When you talk about Dungeons & Dragons on the internet, you will inevitably get a question about how you can make sure to avoid running a scenario that's only going to TPK your players. And one of the best answers I've seen, and one that I personally tend to subscribe to, is that honestly just making sure your players know that they're going to face a certain monster is the best way to avoid a TPK. If you can foreshadow the threat, your players will begin to have a better sense of what they're up against, and it can help inform some decisions about how they're going to approach the scenario. If your players know they're going to face a Medusa or a vampire, those two answers are going to radically change the way they just enter the battlefield, let alone the potions they buy and the spells they prepare. In this case, Matt's players don't have nearly the same opportunity for that sort of recon they would need to do in order to be ready for this fight. And Matt doesn't have the sort of runway he needs to foreshadow these enemies far enough in advance of the combat. But he still makes sure that the second enemy is not going to be a complete surprise in the next session. Sure, his players don't have enough time to equip new magic items or prepare anything that weren't already going to have on their person before this fight, but at least now they can start to think about who is better prepared against which of these foes and what they can do strategically during the next encounter. It is a really expert piece of dungeon mastering, and I have been so impressed with it for literally years at this point. And this is absolutely something that I have stolen and implemented in my own games. When your session ends and your players are right about to go into combat, I think it's just playing fair to give them any information you can in order for them to better anticipate the fight that is about to come about in the next session. Plus, there's the added bonus that it does make for a terrific cliffhanger. And speaking of cliffhangers, that does it for this episode, but we'll be back next week to discuss episode 76, Brawl in the Arches. And once again, my goal is to try to get this video out on Thursday, but there's a chance it could come out on Friday or Saturday instead. These videos are pretty elaborate, and I've got a lot going on these days.
I told you to delete your channel.